Hi, everyone. This week we're going to take a closer look at the charismatic renewal. And as we look at the charismatic renewal, it was something in which Christians were united by shared experience. Uh, those involved in the charismatic movement became baptized in the Holy Spirit. They experienced the expression of spiritual gifts and they desired a deeper experience with God, much like earlier Christians in earlier centuries had. The Christians, like in the Montanists of the second century, that felt a deeper desire to connect with God, or the mystics of the 11th through the 15th centuries. All of these groups emphasized a deeper connection with God, and also many of them, if not most of them, emphasized the baptism in the Holy Spirit and the expression of spiritual gifts. So this charismatic movement, while it was unique for the 20th century, it was not unique in Christianity, and perhaps the greatest unique part of it was its global expansion and global influence. In addition, this movement also placed an emphasis on orthopathy. Now, probably most of you have heard the term orthodoxy, which means right belief, but maybe you haven't heard the term orthopathy, which means right heart or right connection before God. Or perhaps maybe the term orthopraxy is new to you, which means right action before God, doing the right thing. The charismatic movement emphasized having a right heart and a right connection with God. Now, myself, I became a Christian in the midst of the charismatic movement, really at the intersection of where the Jesus People movement and the charismatic movement um, really intersected at their height. In late 1972, I was introduced to Christianity in a room full of hippies speaking in tongues. That was my introduction to Christianity, and I became saved, and shortly after that became baptized in the Holy Spirit at that meeting. And a very early Christian leader who I met shortly after that was somebody named Demas Shakarian. While I only met him personally once, he influenced my life, and the organization he founded, the Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship, also directly influenced my life as a young Christian. It became, for several decades, the most influential Christian businessmen's organization, not only in North America, but throughout the world. I actually wrote a book about Demas Shakarian. Why? Because Demas Shakarian was one of three people who most people agree were the three people most influential in helping to launch the charismatic movement. His organization, his business organization, helped spread the word of the charismatic movement among Christian lay people, and it empowered Christian lay people to help spread this movement throughout North America and throughout the world in all sorts of Christian denominations and Christian groups. Um, One last time, I do want to mention the Kardashians. Why? Because their grandfather was Demas Shakarian's pastor in this small Pentecostal Armenian church that in La Habra Heights, California. So again, the Kardashians preceded Azusa Street. They were at Azusa Street, and they also helped influence and shape the life of Demas Shakarian, one of the three prominent leaders within the charismatic movement. The second prominent leader in the charismatic movement I want to mention is David Duplessis. He was the Christian ecumenist who united denominations in this movement, and he helped it become a movement that affected virtually every Christian denomination in the world. He was especially helpful in bridging the gap between Protestant and Roman Catholic charismatics as he began what is called the Pentecostal Catholic dialogue. which still exists today when scholars from both Christian communities regularly and annually interact and discuss with each other. The third leader of this charismatic movement was Dennis Bennett. And he's the one that really kind of helped launch its popularity. I guess you could say it began in when he announced to his large congregation in southern and Van Nuys, California, on April 8th, 1960, that he had been baptized in the Holy Spirit. He was immediately asked to resign, but then he was assigned a new congregation at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Seattle. Um, Really, in a way, that church became kind of the Azusa Street mission of the charismatic movement, as Christians from all sorts and all denominations, all branches, gathered at this church. It was an enormously popular church in Seattle at its time, and he was very, very influential in the early charismatic movement. He and his wife, Rita, wrote a book about the Holy Spirit that was very popular in the 70s and 80s. It was required reading for me as a young student at Oral Roberts University. So, as as um, as renewal began to spread in the United States and globally in the 1960s, one of the first groups to experience renewal was the Anglican Church. It grew so quickly, especially in Africa, that currently today approximately 70% of all Anglican churches globally, especially in Africa, identify themselves as charismatic or spirit-filled. Lutherans and Presbyterians in many churches quickly accepted charismatic renewal as well. And for a while, I personally attended a Presbyterian church myself. And I knew of other Presbyterian churches in the United States that were touched by the charismatic movement. The Methodist churches were very significantly influenced by the charismatic movement, partly because of renewal that began at Asbury Seminary, a charismatic renewal that began at Asbury Seminary in 1970, which was one of the leading Methodist seminaries in the United States. And this revival led to hundreds of Methodist pastors in the United States becoming spirit-filled. Also, Oral Roberts University became a Methodist seminary in the late 70s, led by Jimmy Buskirk, which helped lead to further influence in the Methodist churches. There was also renewal in Baptist churches when a wide variety of leaders, including Pat Robertson, helped influence other Baptists, also James Robeson, and also John Osteen as a Baptist preacher that became spirit-filled. His son Joel became the pastor of the church after John died, and for a long time, um, uh, uh, Joel Osteen's church in Lakewood, Texas, was the largest church in North America, and is still among the top 5 largest churches in North America. Interestingly, in 2016, just a few years ago, Southern Baptists finally agreed that speaking in tongues was a biblically acceptable practice. And this was partly simply because they recognized that, globally speaking, their movement had already been so touched by the charismatic movement that it was impossible to maintain a theological perspective of cessationism regarding speaking in tongues and other gifts of the Holy Spirit. What that means is that for a period of time, there was really for over a century, there was this doctrine of cessationism that infiltrated a lot of churches in Europe and North America. And it looks like we're running out of time, so we're going to have to go to part 2 to further discuss this issue of cessationism. So talk to you in just a minute.